Okay, welcome everyone to the third session of our symposium. For the third session, the moderator is Sam Cave. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Sam is an English guitarist and composer, and one of the UK's leading exponents of new music on the guitar. He's performed in venues and festivals in the UK and abroad, in such places as the National Gallery, St John Smith Square, the London International Guitar Festival, and many other places. As a composer, he graduated with a PhD from Brunel University, studying with Christopher Fox. He's currently an LSO Sound Hub Associate Composer, or he was from 2017 to 2019. And he's also a tutor in guitar at Brunel University and a guest lecturer in composition for guitar at Coventry University and a lecturer in composition and orchestration at Kingston University. So welcome, Sam. And the two presenters for the third session are Yiorgis Sakellariou and Zheng Xinghui. So I'll start by introducing Yiorgis. Yiorgis is a composer of experimental and electroacoustic music. He's active internationally and has composed music for short films and theatrical performances, and has led workshops and has performed his music all across the globe. His practice focuses on the communal experience of listening and the communication between composer, audiences, performance spaces, and the rest of the physical and supernatural world. He completed his PhD at Coventry University in April 2018, and his PhD thesis explored the sonic symbolism and socio-aesthetic settings in ecstatic religious rituals, in relation to field recording, electroacoustic composition, and acousmatic performance. He's also a member of the Athenian Contemporary Music Research Center and the Hellenic Electroacoustic Music Composers Association, as well as the Lithuanian Composers Union. And he's currently a lecturer at Vytautas Magnus University and the Lithuanian Academy of Music and Theatre. So welcome, Yiorgis. You have 20 minutes for your presentation.
I hope you can hear me and see me well. Well, fantastic. A little confirmation was needed for that. Good afternoon or good morning, perhaps even good evening, depending on which part of the planet you are. As much as it is exciting, it is still a little bit awkward having to meet under such conditions. Nevertheless, I would like to begin by thanking the academic committee for accepting my proposal and giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. I will discuss and analyze the concepts and processes of composing neris. This is an electroacoustic work consisting exclusively of field recordings from Neris River here in Vilnius, Lithuania. Neris is part of River Sounds, a platform for virtual sonic experiences and an online residency program. The composition explores the connection between music making and mythology and interrogates the mythological meanings of rivers and water, the eternal flow, and the notion of death and rebirth. This is my first consideration to respond to the title of our symposium. The second consideration will be about the experience of online listening to a musical work, as I will be raising some questions about its function and value. To briefly further introduce a little bit my practice and research interest, my fundamental artistic questions are mainly concerned about the relationships between sound, environments, fellow practitioners, and audiences. Through my work, I explore the way music is used to connect the material with the supernatural world. The aim is to intensify the transcendental power of music and challenge the listener's perception of reality. In other words, I use sound to invoke spirit worlds. In addition, and it is crucial to highlight, I am interested in the communication between people living in the physical world and how they bond together through the communal experience of listening to a musical composition. In recent years, I have been interested in the connection between music making and mythology. As writer Karen Armstrong explains, mythology teaches human beings to see beyond the tangible world into a reality that embodies something else, the wholly other, as historian of religion Mircea Eliade has called it. Moreover, a myth cannot be successful if it focuses only on the supernatural. It must be concerned with humanity. Its truth will be revealed only through ritual and practice. Mythology is not about analyzing facts and numbers, but about enabling and empirically understanding human behavior and emotions. A myth, therefore, is not a fairy tale or a representation of something else. It is an organ of reality that, similarly to listening to music, it comes into being through performance and immediate experience. So, accordingly, during the process of field recording around Neris and composing the work in the studio, I examined the mythological meanings of rivers and water. That was one of my main sources of sonic material. To begin with, water has always contained powerful symbolisms concerning life and death. In Christianity, baptism signifies the beginning of life and also gives a strong sense of belonging to a community. In the Muslim world, washing is essential to prepare one's body for the activity of the spirit. In India, Ganges is still imagined as a Milky Way that transformed into a river. Coming directly from the sky, the river establishes a connection between heaven and earth. Moreover, in Finnish mythology, the Tuori River is a passage to Tuonela, the realm of the dead. Similarly, in Greek mythology, the rivers Styx and Acheron were crossed by the souls of the dead to reach the underworld. Mythologies around the world show that rivers are inhabited by ancient spirits, nymphs, and other water creatures, indicating a divine presence in nature. Rivers signify a journey between worlds. They are thresholds, borders, liminal spaces that fuel human imagination with awe and wonder. In its turn, water includes all possibilities of existence. To immerse into water is to dissolve all forms. It implies both death and rebirth. In my practice, I negotiate the notion of birth, death, and rebirth via listening, field recording, and composing, which are all methods of a continuous circle of discovery. In the words of ethnomusicologist Stephen Feld, field recording is an act of questioning the world by listening to it. In this spirit, field recording is not only an exploration of a physical environment, Neris in my case, but also a way of perceiving the environment, a method of connecting with it. Furthermore, to record is not simply to document or represent reality, but to interact with it, to engage in a very profound way. The focus shifts from the physically perceived and geographically defined natural environment to the galloping imagination that is stimulated by the interactions with it. As a recording location, Neris has a distinct sonic character, including diverse musical qualities, some gentle and comforting, others sinister and ominous. Consequently, the recording of the river was not a mere study and collection of sounds and information about Neris, but an empirical interaction where I discovered the extraordinary in the mundane, where the familiar city that I live in transmuted into a space for dialogue and contemplation. These transmutations continued during studio work. When I returned to the studio with my recordings, there is this question: how is the identity of the recorded sounds affected by the transition from field to studio? How are the qualities transformed? Electronic music composer and sound designer Kim Cascone argues that the recording of a natural soundscape, for example, a forest, cannot capture the complete experience of listening on location, regardless of its technical quality. When the recordist returns to the studio, he or she listens to fragmented and codified data reproduced through the loudspeakers, but misses what Cascone calls the soul of the forest. He describes the playback of the data as a reanimation of the recorded material, as the way in which the practice of field recording contributes, perhaps unknowingly, to the theme of resurrection, the overcoming of death that has been described in numerous mythical stories throughout history and around the globe. And indeed, recording promises immortality. That was exactly what originally excited people when the phonograph, the first recording device, was invented by Thomas Edison back in 1877. As a result, working with recorded environmental sounds is signifying a transition from one world and being reborn into another, which makes me think of rivers again and their mysterious mythologies. Moreover, when I work in the studio, I do not perceive the field recordings as sound objects, to use the traditional Seferian term, but as sonic events that every time they are reproduced, they release a floating and dynamic energy that affects the playback environment and its listeners. By embracing the acousmatic tradition, I consider recorded sounds to have their independent ontological value. Therefore, I'm always a bit hesitant to talk about the sound of something, the sound of rain, the sound of a bird, the sound of a train. I do not wish to reduce sound to a secondary quality of another object or action. In this spirit, the field recordings in my composition are not simply the sound of Neris River, and that is because listening is a holistic and synesthetic experience, a poetic act. It is the construction of a here and now, sound-mediated reality expanding between the tangible and the elusive. I would like now to examine the second consideration and share some thoughts about the interactive interface that accommodates the works of river sounds. The project invites listeners to navigate the rivers of Europe, and it is described as a virtual portal for connecting the physical realities of different cities through sound. The interface aims to resemble the condition of listening on location, where one can move around, change orientation, and decide on which sounds to focus from an individual perspective. Practically, by interacting with the interface, the listeners can make their own variations of their works by adjusting the volume of different tracks and perhaps even adding reverb delays and filters, Now, just allow me just to share a screenshot. It should be, just bear with me for a minute, please. Sorry about that. I am here. Let's try this again. Share a window. That would work much better, I would say. So first time on Google Meets, they all look quite similar, but they are all different. Here's my screenshot. So as you move the mouse around the interface, the mix of the piece changes according to compositional decisions, and people sort of like navigate through the river, as I said, from their individual perspective. When River Sounds curators presented the interface to me, I immediately thought about Glenn Gould and his idea of participant listeners. Already in the 1960s, the celebrated and innovative pianist had envisioned sound playback technologies that would convert the listener into a collaborator, or, to use his words, into an associate whose tastes, preferences, and inclinations alter peripherally the experiences to which he gives his attention. The participant listener, Gould continues, transforms the work and his relation to it from an artistic to an environmental experience. I can suspect that Gould would be interested in the River Sounds interface and the possibilities it opens for the interaction between sound work and listener. With River Sounds, there is this attempt to break down the composer-audience distinction. Listeners are responsible in a very individualistic way for adjusting the works to their personal taste. However, I can't resist in asking, are they still listeners? Or perhaps they are transforming into users of the interface? Or to what Glenn Gould called potential usurpers of power, uninvited guests. Composing for and interacting with the River Sounds interface encourages this questioning about musical meaning and value in the online world. It is argued that nowadays the artistic aim is the production of demand rather than content. Ensuring, or at least hoping, we will get someone's attention on the internet is becoming almost an integral part of artistic and musical practices. Years after Gould's considerations, what is now the main point of interest is what social theorist Jacques Attali called the spectacle of oneself. That is the ultimate functionality. In addition, Attali underlines that meaning in music is in function, in the signification of elements combined together. But he's not talking about aesthetic function, which he considers to be a modern aim anyway, but about the effectiveness of participants in a social regulation. I argue that to enable this function, this effectiveness, music, same as mythology, needs ritual. Musicologist Christopher Small claims that ritual is the mother of all arts. Ritual is enacted in performance and shapes art into form. Therefore, ritual is the instrument of music making that simultaneously provides a meaning to it. That is, to stimulate a social connection and a wider understanding of the world in a collective way. So the question rises again, how is this possible in virtual environments? Back at the end of the 20th century, when the World Wide Web was growing in phenomenal speed, writer and cyber guru Eric Davis observed, and I quote, that detached from a common vision of public space and shared intellectual culture, online society becomes a hive of virtual communities made up of solitary souls. He also added that we inhabit not a universe, but a multiverse in which it is difficult, if not dangerous, to navigate. The thoughts of Davis may be pessimistic, but for me at least, they are an invitation to challenge the understanding of virtual environments and interactive tools in an attempt to firstly discover revised values in music, and secondly, establish, if possible, additional ways of connecting communities. This symposium is also a great example of such an opportunity. We are together alone, present, absent in an event that, of course, we would usually experience under quite different conditions. To conclude, or at least attempt to tie things together, anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss has explained that in modern times, music has taken over the emotional and intellectual functions originally served by mythology. As we continue moving a great deal of musical practice into cyberspace, can we preserve the conditions for musical myth or invent new ones? Can we perform common actions, rituals, to share a sense of discovery and meaning? I hope that your engagement with my work on Neris and listening to it through the River Sounds platform will be a mythical journey of discovery and transformation. Nevertheless, and to be honest with you, I am concerned that this solitary activity, regardless how user-friendly or intuitive it can be, will not be as profound as a shared listening experience, being together at the same space in the same time. I still encourage you to listen online, but I hope in the future we will have an opportunity to collectively perform a ritual and generate our own new myths. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Yiorgis. So, Sam, over to you for your response.
Thank you. Yiorgis, what a fantastic presentation. And thank you very much for that. I was really deeply moved by your ideas about connection with nature, but also a deeper connection really with the universe and communicating with other human beings through that connection. And I think that in many ways that's what everyone who composes or performs music is trying to do. And I was very interested in what you were saying about mythology. And of course, mythologies are very important in all cultures. And most of the mythologies that you mentioned have rituals that are associated with them. You spoke about baptism, for example. And that has a highly ritualistic aspect that is connected with its mythology. So I wondered if you could say something about what the ritualistic aspects are of your practice and how ritual is embedded in your work, perhaps with reference to Neris, but perhaps in a wider context of your work, what role ritual plays.
Yes, in relation to Neris, and composing the piece, well, can I make a confession really quickly? This is something, as you understood, my slight dissatisfaction of the platforms, this online approach of interpreting the works, led me into actually composing an entirely different piece with the same material, which I am aiming to perform in a more like concert type situations, if I may call them. But going back to the question regarding the ritualistic aspect, it is actually part of my practice right from the beginning. Like a field recording, being out there in the world, let's say, is in itself a kind of personal, but still a ritual, a kind of a performance. Where ritual defined not necessarily from the religious perspective, of course, let's clarify that. I mean, a ritual is not necessarily of religious context. It can be a football game, a handshake where two people meet and so on. So I sort of like found myself ritualizing, repeating some aspects, like some physical movements and so on, while walking around the river, listening and recording, and trying to engage with nature and the universe ultimately, as you mentioned. As far as the wider musical practice, and I relate this, being an acousmatic music composer, I relate this quite a lot to this loudspeaker-only performances, which I find to be highly ritualistic. But unfortunately, when it comes to this field of music, this ritualistic aspect is neglected because of the unnecessary obsession with focus and focus on technology.
Yes.
And number of loudspeakers and multi-channel ambisonics and all those things that, you know, if you're familiar with, you understand that it's usually what people are discussing about. But I'll finish and I'll quote another musicologist, John Blacking, who said, like, if the purpose is to generate a social situation, why bother with musical and technical innovation? So as I am exploring the acousmatic settings and the ritual of electroacoustic music, I'm mostly interested in that, this idea of gathering to share an aesthetic experience and a common understanding of the world. And as I said, in recent years, this started to draw a lot of context and inspiration, if I may say, from mythology, which, as I understand, I'm going down the road and I research about it, it has all these common functions with music.
Yes, fascinating. I have two more things to say, and then perhaps we should open it up for a discussion from the floor. I noticed that some people have their hands raised in the queue. I thought it was very beautiful what you said about discovering the extraordinary in the mundane. And it reminded me that mundane, you know, has the root of the word mundus, which means of the world. And I wanted to compliment you on the way that your work, to me, is confirming that the world is an extraordinary place. And I think to be in and interact with, and I think in our clamor to have this, what you described as, you know, the purpose of the thing being to get likes online or whatever, we can forget that the world is an extraordinary place and one that we should experience with great reverence and love. And so I congratulate you on confirming that in your musical work. When you make field recordings, you're capturing a sound, yes, and an essence of a place, true. But to me, you're also capturing the essence of a time. Those sound recordings are unique to the time in which they are created and taken. And that seems like an extraordinary feature of what you do, and a feature of a field recording that has extraordinary potential for exploration. And so I wondered whether you could say something about this sort of time capsule aspect of making field recordings, and perhaps tell us something about the role that time plays in your work.
Okay, I'll try to be short. Okay, just first, like, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the word capturing. I feel it's a little bit aggressive because I'm not hunting sounds to capture them. And this is kind of like this background of almost, I think, this early anthropology and ethnography, where they were going like to document and had this scientific observation approach, like they were above things and they were just examining them objectively. I'm interacting, and this is part of a dialogue, not necessarily a hunt. But please do not misunderstand. I don't want to correct anybody. It's just that I'm not hunting anything down to capture it. Now, the important aspect of time, that's huge, actually. That's all. Just the very brief comment I want to make about this is that, yes, indeed, I'm not only recording sounds and textures, but I'm also recording time.
Yeah.
And what I do in composition, you know, okay, we are here in a composition symposium, so I think that would be useful to say, is that when I edit recordings, and I build a structure out of that. We still need, you know, to think about form and structure. I'm drawing inspiration, if I can use the word, why not, from the way director Andrei Tarkovsky was editing. Because he was saying when he was filming, he was not only capturing action, but also time. And there was this energy and mesostructure, a middle level structure in what was filmed. And it's kind of like similar to a field recording. And it indicates to be quite a lot musical decisions, dynamics, durations of passages and sections. Of course, I am allowing myself to be a little bit in control, but I think I'm more of a Morton Feldman in this one. I kind of like let the sounds tell me what to do rather than me imposing my will on them. It's always a very difficult and, dare I say, painful process to find the proper balance between the time included and the needs, the musical needs of the composition, and how to bring these two together in the most effective way.
Yes, I can see that. Yes, that's very interesting. Well, thank you for that. I hope that my brief and perfunctory comments have stimulated some thoughts from our esteemed delegates, and so perhaps we should open to the floor now for some questions and or comments. George, how do you manage the queue? Are you managing the queue from your end?
The queue. Well, I can see that Chen Yishuan has a question, so
Lovely.
we could invite Chen Yishuan to pose his question.
Great.
Thank you much. Thank you so much for your fantastic presentation. And I do have some questions regarding the methodology that you just talked about. It's so interesting, and the reason why it's so interesting, which kind of reminds me of the concept of soundscape proposed by Murray Schafer. And he used certain methodology in particular to introduce how ancient people perceive the sonic environment during that time. And listening to your music makes me remind of some ideas that, is that your intention to try to kind of establish the dialogue between the modern people and the ancient people? And this conversation is very interesting to me because ancient people and modern people perceive the sonic environment very, very differently. And it's kind of like navigating our perception of the sonic environment from the point of time in modern time to the past. So I'm just curious about, is this your intention to try to build this conversation between the history and living in nowadays? Kind of like the connection between different kinds of modes of listening.
I had to think a little bit about it as you were phrasing the question, and I think the answer would be yes. In the sense that I understand music as an ongoing activity, and I think we will understand music and what we do the more we are able to establish connections throughout history. And it can be argued that the further back we go, the more strong the understanding of what we will do it will be. Because indeed, and that relates a little bit to one of Sam's comments, especially when it comes like to soundscape or electroacoustic music, again, we have this illusion that this is something necessarily very modern and related to our contemporary digital technologies. But in fact, this idea of listening dates back to the beginnings of human civilization. And I would like to see that connection happening in music making, because listening is a very important part of our evolution process.
Yeah.
It was literally survival skills. So practically, aesthetically, a combination of both. As we dive back in time in an attempt to understand what's happening today, I think it's really necessary. So what I do definitely did not land through a membrane from another dimension all of a sudden in 2021. It has those really, really, really deep roots. And definitely worth consciously and subconsciously knowing that and working with it, not only as the creative people that we are, but also in terms of the perception of the work from our listeners. This is something important as well. This is not just about methods of composing, but most importantly, methods of perceiving the work.
Yeah.
Methods of making the work somehow relatable and important to other people's lives.
Yep, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I noticed that Sandra Torelli has a question. Go ahead.
Hi. Hello. I just have one question. Can you hear me clearly? I asked you in other conference because I knew your answer would be very important for us. What did you do when you, what was your first thing you would do when you bring all the equipment to the field site and plan to begin a field recording? What would you do for the first thing?
Put the equipment aside.
No. I mean, when you just arrived,
area, I know. I put the equipment aside. Like I start thinking about the equipment and ways of recording after spending as much time as possible, or let's say as much time as needed to listen. I don't have this rush. I think, like, if I may say, like, a mistake that I think sometimes people make is like rushing into pressing record. Just allow the sounds to sink in. Allow yourself some time to open up your ears and kind of like navigate around the area, and then gradually, slowly start making recording decisions and start thinking about equipment, which microphone, which distance, and all those things. So I think I had this very important rule, which is know when not to record.
Thank you.
Which, of course, I always break.
That reminds me of an interview I saw with filmmaker Werner Herzog, who said that when young filmmakers come and they say they've shot 670 hours, he says his heart breaks. And I think the quote was that he said, "We're filmmakers, not garbage collectors."
Yeah.
And
so just a second.
Yes, of course. George, we have some more questions.
I just bought this yesterday. Like I literally bought this yesterday.
Very good.
Lin Qianjun. Oh no, it's who has got their hand raised at the moment?
This is Zhong Xianyang.
Please go ahead.
Would you be willing to elaborate a little bit more on your thesis, your presentation, and Joseph Campbell, and also in particular, Marshall McLuhan, because I'm very interested in what you would have to say.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you, because the first name, to be completely honest, is unknown to me. And I haven't studied much McLuhan to confidently make a comment about his ideas about medium, except, of course, the famous quote, "The medium is the message." So it's quite away from my field of little knowledge that I have anyway. But I would be happy to elaborate on something else that is a bit more familiar. I do apologize for that. And actually, it's so great to see that there are so many things that I don't know. It's always a great reminder.
Well, that's all right, because, let me say, Joseph Campbell is a American mythologist who used to teach at Lawrence College or something like that, and used to do a program on CBS, if I get it right, and he was very interesting about mythology and the society, and of course McLuhan has more direct connection to what you were saying today. But that's okay. I'm just curious what you have to say.
Well, I'm going to definitely look into Joseph Campbell more for sure.
Okay, thank you.
That's quite important. Thank you for the input.
Very good. I think we might have time for one more quick one.
Yeah,
if
I
anybody
think we
has a
do.
quick question. I think we've got time for one more before we have to move on. If anybody has a quick fire round that they'd like to put to Yiorgis.
Oh, no. I heard a sound.
I heard the sound.
Ah, 张老师.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested, I'm very curious about the development of acoustic music in Japan. Japan has reached very high technique in this field. I mean, just like the radio phones, INA, they have on stage over 30 loudspeaker and the very fascinating concert. How about it is in Japan? Thank you.
I wouldn't know. I have never visited Japan, unfortunately. I would like to go. That's for sure. It's on the top of my list, or at least top 3 of places I would like to visit. And from the little I know, there is indeed a very peculiar connection between the Japanese culture and technology. Some of the things I've been reading, especially the post-war Japan, and how they kind of like quickly, almost violently transformed into a modern society. But there are a lot of elements from their traditional culture that are still somehow obvious in the way they're using technology. Well, let's hope we'll do another symposium in Tokyo or Kyoto. We can all meet there and listen to music together and discuss more.
But electronic music is also very lively and experimental, and there's a rich culture in Lithuania as well. We probably have a couple more minutes that we could spend if you wanted to share with us some of your knowledge about electroacoustic or electronic music in Lithuania.
Well, yes. For Lithuania, I can speak with more confidence. I've been here for 3 years, and I have been basically a strong connection with the country since 2010. What I can say, there is definitely a very strong contemporary music scene in Lithuania. There are, dare I say, even dozens of upcoming brilliant composers, and of course a lot of established ones that developed their career during the Soviet times and so on. But electronic music is something a little bit more recent, and its roots are more from industrial music and experimental music rather than the more academic electroacoustic side. And I think you can still see that difference, the little gap between what in the academy we call it academic composition, and then we got those sort of like music technology oriented courses, and the aesthetics are often quite different.
That's very interesting. Yes.
Thank you.
I remember experiencing that sort of gap actually when I was there.
Yeah,
I think
definitely. I can see Sandra has her hand up again, but we need to move on shortly, but we could fit in one more question.
Oh, just one more question, because I was in your concert about 4 years ago, and since the worst condition is just like right now, I'm wondering if that's a possibility. You can present your sound work in the concert hall without you to be there, for example, because hearing your music is quite important to understand better your theory today, and your music and your sound work are quite great. If we could have that chance.
Well, I think that's a question for everybody. Like, even if our compositions are score-based, you send the score, maybe you talk with the musicians a little bit via Zoom. Is the presence of the composer important or not? I'll just leave this open. This is for everybody to think, like, where is the spirit of the composition? When we hear ta 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 ta, we say it's Beethoven. Beethoven became this spirit included in the notes. We don't say it is Beethoven, who right now is not even food for worms. So this transformation, this transmutation, is something that we can negotiate in a concert, whether our presence physically is important or not. And I'm not talking about the technical stuff. I'm just talking about us being there and what does it mean for the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yiorgis
Thank you.
Sakellariou.